Can I take you with me when I go speak places? Love the paintball deal on the shirt. Very appropriate. Love that. The Suns and the Wolves this Saturday. Any Suns fans here? We're in trouble. I got a bad feeling about this series being from Minnesota. The Suns have thumped the Wolves 3 times this year that they've played them. But I don't know. We'll see what happens. Hey, I am just tickled to be here. Don't deserve to be here. You could have picked a zillion people. But I'm just very truly honored and humbled and grateful for what God is doing through all of you. Landon prayed in his prayer at the top, if you're a pastor going through some struggles. And I'm like, yeah, if you're a pastor, you're going through struggles. And so I appreciate that, Landon. But yeah, all of us have struggles very much. This morning, just to tee this off, I go through the New Testament, and then I go through it again and go just rotate it every time. And I'm in 2 Corinthians 2, and this morning's reading, just a couple of verses, 2 Corinthians 2:2. I came to you in weakness and fear and great struggle. And whenever I go and stand before folks like you, that's how I feel. Weakness and fear with much trembling. My message and preaching were not with wise and persuasive words, but with a demonstration of the Spirit's power, so that your faith and my faith might not rest on man's wisdom, that your faith might not rest on anything that I would say today, but on God's power. But I come to you really with weakness and fear. I want to start by saying how proud I am for all of you for stepping into the crosshairs of leadership. Because whenever you do that, comes criticism, fear, and self-doubt. We try to fake it. We try to convince ourselves that we're above all that, but usually that's just a cover. Honestly, I have battled fear and self-doubt my entire life. I feel woefully inadequate, really, to lead anything. And I've been around enough other very gifted leaders to know that behind their accomplishments is a person who questions their abilities and struggles with self-doubt. Every single leader that I have met has these struggles if they're honest with themselves. I love how Paul says it in 2 Corinthians 7. He says, I came to you with trouble on the outside and fear on the inside. I love that verse. One of the strongest leaders ever to walk the planet said that he had trouble on the outside and fear on the inside. And I can tell you as a leader and a pastor, that's my life. That was my daily life and still is to this day. I had a guy at the gym just the other day tell me, but Bob, what you need to do is to trust more. Because trust is the cure for fear. And I agree with that. That as my trust goes up, my fear goes down, but I'm still human. And so things like a blank computer screen on a Monday morning scare me because in 5 or 6 days there's going to be hundreds, if not thousands, of people showing up expecting to hear something that will fix their kids, solve their marriage, cure their loneliness, and give them hope. And that scares me. I don't know about you if you happen to have to speak at that. Board meetings used to scare me because I never knew what somebody was going to say or somebody going to do, and you just never know what's going to happen. Shirley Shilla scared the life out of me because every Sunday morning she would hunt me down with her cat claws out trying to tear me apart for something that happened. Just a nasty, nasty, bad lady in our church. That's all there is to it. Certain staff scared me. 2 different executive pastors were so subversive and hurtful, they nearly ended my career. Gang, this is the land of leadership. Trouble on the outside, fear on the inside. So on that cheerful note, let me encourage you. We can do all things, not in our power, I am a weak, my wife says, you're just a bald little man. I am a weak person. So it's not my strength, but I can, and I think a better way to say this, I can get through all things through Christ who gives me the strength to do that. My daughter was in gymnastics, and one night I was picking her up after practice, and I was early, so I went in, sat down on the bleachers, and I watched the kids work out for a bit, and one of the coaches was trying to get this poor little girl to do a backflip on a 4-inch wide beam, which is totally insane. The human body was not made to do a backflip on a 4-inch wide beam, and this girl was terrified. She stood on the beam, and she said to her coach, "But I can't do it." And my heart went out to her. I didn't know this girl, but under my breath, I said, "She can't do it." And I'm just a dad in the bleachers. The coach said, "Yes, you can." The girl said, "No, I can't." I said, "No, she can't." The coach said, "Just throw yourself over." And I thought, have you lost your mind? The girl said, "I will hurt myself." I said, "She's going to hurt herself." By now, I was standing on the bleachers because I was emotionally involved, and the coach persisted, "Yes, you can." I was saying, "No, she can't. Look at her. She's frail. She's weak. Leave her alone." That girl took one last look at the balance beam. She looked at her coach, and she threw herself over backwards. It wasn't pretty. Arms were flailing around, but she flipped over backwards, landed on that beam, and stood there like an Olympian. And I shouldn't have applauded by the looks I got by the other moms, but I was just into this. But that was the moment I realized something, that the difference between those who succeed or fail is not fear, because we're all afraid. The difference is the willingness to jump. See if you agree with this. Leadership isn't the absence of fear. It's the willingness to jump in spite of the fears that we have. And I wonder if you have ever had an "I can't do it" moment. I can't do this. You're on the beam, you're looking down, you think, I can't do this. Gang, this is the land of leadership where you're in over your head. You don't know what to do next, but you look into the eyes of Christ and you just kind of trust that He put you where you are for a reason. It's not an accident where you are, what you're doing. And you jump, not knowing if it's going to turn out. So with that as a foundation, I want to touch on 4 principles that I would have told my 25-year-old self. I was 25 at one point. Thanks for that comment, by the way. Who was that, Dave? Yeah, I am old, 67. But maybe I have some experience. That's all we old guys have, is some experience to share with you. But what would I have told myself if I was 25 years old trying to lead a church of 300? First thing I'd have said, when you jump, it'll take 20 years to build something great. I was 34 years old when I came to our church of 300 in White Bear. And in my first year, all 3 of my staff quit, which was nice. I had no plan, no strategy. People would ask me this question, "Bob, what's your vision?" I didn't even know what that was. Had no idea, no strategy. We were a small Baptist church with a robed choir, fine, and a worship guy who led hymns in a suit coat and a trombone. It's just brutal. Nobody knew me. Nobody expected anything. There wasn't a single indicator that we would become a church of impact. The only thing I had was a commitment to jump, all in. Show up every day, write the best messages I could, and try to get our custodian to clean the bathrooms. It was like every day I'd come to work and walk into our lobby, and I was like, "Can't you smell that?" Part-time custodian, he just never got it. It was like this was a thing every day. The bathrooms need to be cleaner, is what I would say to him. I can tell you, honest to truth, becoming a large church was never a goal. Wasn't even on my radar. It was simply to show up every day and do the best I could. You know what most large churches have in common? Not all, but most. Their founding pastors are old, usually in their 50s or 60s, with the battle scars to show it. Why? Because I believe it takes about 20 years to build something of scale. It takes 20 years of building trust, fighting battles, dealing with staff, neutralizing complainers, raising money, improving the music and improving the music and improving the music, writing copy, editing a message, and relentless attention to details. Details. Every single weekend. No matter where we were. By the way, if you jump in and stay put for 20 years, you'll beat 95% of the competition who are still in COVID clothes, taking calls on mid-morning and mid-afternoon walks. If you're an IT guy, I get it. We don't need to see you. Go ahead and take your walks. Do your IT stuff on your phone. But not if you're a church leader. Not that IT guys aren't church leaders. Sorry, you guys. I love you guys. But the senior guy sets the pace for everything. Those of you who are senior leaders, your work ethic, your humility, huge. The culture that you're trying to set, and quality control. And you are so consistent as a leader in all of these areas that it's predictable. In fact, you are boringly consistent. I mean, when you arrive to work, same time every day. When you read your Bible in the morning, same time every day. When you get your coffee and walk down the hallway, same time every day and same amount every day. When you do all these things in a daily, weekly rhythm, what that does is it builds a stability in your staff and a stability in your church. You are so boringly consistent. They're like, oh, we're safe. It's going to be okay today. He's in his spot. I hope that's how you feel about your senior leader. I had a middle-aged guy, newer to our staff, started hounding my assistant for an hour of my time, and I how can I say this nicely? I wasn't thrilled with him. Short guy, big truck, oversized ego. But he had enough experience to somehow get hired. So I finally agreed to meet with him. And so he strides into my office, pulls a chair up right into my space. And the first thing out of his mouth was this: I want to be in your chair. I said, what? I said, what do you mean? He said, I want to be where you are. I want to be in your chair. I thought, okay, here we go. I said, well, here's what it's going to take. You go to college for 4 years, and you go to seminary for 4 years, back-to-back 8 years higher education, while driving school bus and doing youth work just to survive. Then you spend 5 years in a tiny little rural church in Wisconsin where nobody knows where you are. You live on $11,000 a year for 5 years driving dumpy little cars instead of a nice big shiny truck that you can't afford. I didn't say that. Then you go back to school for 3 more years at Penn State University to try to find yourself. Then you come to a church where all 3 of your staff quit and you barely make it, but you slug it out for the next 10 years. You preach 48 weekends a year until you're fried. And then the board threatens to fire you because unless you get and deal with your anger issues, so you go to counseling for 2 years. And if you survive all that, then, after 15 more years of trouble on the outside and fear on the inside, maybe then you can sit in my chair. He was gone within a year. Because I believe it takes about 20 years. It takes a long time of being boringly consistent, showing up day after day when nobody knows who you are, nobody notices. And I believe that's what it takes. Second, don't get pulled off mission. And the first question is, do you have a mission? And is it clear? Our mission was empowered by God to reach others for Christ. That's what we do. That's what we measure. Are people coming to Christ? That is the bottom line question. Is our music reaching people for Christ? Is our teaching, kids ministry reaching people for Christ? Is our weekend so predictably great that our attenders feel confident that no matter what weekend they show up, they know they can invite their neighbor, friend, or coworker because it's so predictably good that it's reaching people for Christ? Are students coming to faith on Wednesday nights? Are people coming to faith in our addiction recovery? Because this is just what I believe. If you do your mission, you will always have a ministry. But if you just do ministry, your church will stagnate and maybe even die off, which is why we are so militant about lopping off ministries that have nothing to do with our mission. Things like adult Sunday school, women's ministries, men's ministries, social groups, preschool, all gone. Not immediately. When we eliminated adult Sunday school, 400 people left our church because we did it too fast and too careless. The decision was right, the execution was wrong, and we paid the price. But gang, I believe one reason churches stagnate is that they are tripping over themselves doing programs that have nothing to do with the mission of reaching people. You know, some of you this week perhaps will get an email from a well-meaning member who wants to start a knitting group for women or a hiking group for men, and they'll want you to promote it, attend it, and fund it. But will it lead people to Christ? No. It'll just suck all your time and resources away from your mission. But when your mission is clear, you know what to say no to. Knowing your mission is priority number one, so you can eliminate all sorts of ancillary programs that are killing you and your staff, just trying to keep up with it. But doing your mission, once again, is a leadership issue. Okay? So in 2005, we opened our new campus in Lino Lakes, Minnesota. It seats 2,000 people. And we went from 5,000 to 8,000 in 3 months. Primarily because we were bursting we just needed to move, and so that's what happened. But it stopped at 8,000 and stayed there for 3 years. And I was so bothered by this that I called a staff-wide meeting and I said this is not okay. We have stopped reaching people and I don't know why, so I'm going to go off by myself for 2 days, sit with God. Hopefully he speaks to me. By the end of those 2 days, I was dangerous. God had spoken to me by his Spirit. By the way, God has never spoken to me in an audible voice. And those of us who are stage people and talk about God speaking to me, don't confuse people by thinking, well, God, I've never heard God's voice audibly. Don't confuse them. Clear that up by saying, I've never heard God's voice audibly as well. Just by his Spirit, he nudges me. By his holy word, okay? Just be real clear about that. That wasn't in my notes, but it bothers me. Every time I hear someone say, God spoke to me, well, what do you mean by that? Is that fair? Okay. Where am I? So anyway, I came back off of this two-day getaway, and I got our staff together, and I realized that the reason we stopped reaching people is because we had stopped inviting people. I got in front of our staff and I said, gang, in the past 3 years, your senior pastor, has not invited a single person to church. I stopped doing our mission. So here's what we're going to do. I told all our staff, we're going to do a 4-part Christmas series. This was in August. We're going to do a 4-part Christmas series called It Would Take a Miracle. And I still remember the messages. It would take a miracle to fix my family, to heal my wound, to find my purpose, and restore my faith. Something that no matter who you are, believer or unbeliever, you can connect with that. So it's going to take a miracle to do these things. And I said, we're going to promise the congregation this will be the best 4-part series we've ever done. We're going to pull out all the stops. But I said to the staff, here's the deal. It starts with me. And it starts with every one of you. I'm going to be an inviting machine to this series, and I expect every one of you as a staff, because we got to lead the way. If we're not doing it, don't expect your congregation to do it. I kept beating this drum all fall long. I told our congregation, if every one of us, all 8,000 of us, would invite one person to church for this Christmas series, we'd grow to 16,000 in 4 weeks. Well, that didn't happen. But we went from 8,000 to 11,000 in a 4-week period. Hundreds of people came to Christ, and we never looked back, and it taught me a single lesson. Leaders have to lead, or nothing happens. Honestly, it actually makes me sick to my stomach if we would have just coasted into Christmas, just do church as usual. Think of what we would have missed. So leaders have to lead. Third thing, brace yourself for correction. And receive correction with humility. So at 5 years old, I didn't know that I would need ongoing correction to succeed in life. At 45 years old, I thought the church has grown from 300 to 10,000. I'm not perfect, but who I am must be working, which is very common, by the way. You as a leader or your church may have some success, which then fools you into thinking that you don't have any issues. You figure, you might have some minor flaws, but who doesn't? And people kind of deal with my flaws. Here's the thing. The talent and drive that made you successful at one level is no longer enough. Because talent and drive can only take you so far. You actually have to love people and be nice and self-controlled. And if you don't willingly submit to correction, your success as a leader, if I can say it that way, will probably stop, or worse, you will fail and be replaced. Here's the reason. Because at a certain point, there's too many people and systems now that need a leader who has his or her act together. They have to mature. They have to gain more character, who controls their mouth and temper, is self-aware, is measured, and doesn't keep blowing things up. What worked at one level will no longer work at this level. One of my biggest regrets in life is that I didn't get help with my flaws until I was 45. 10 years into leading this church. And in case you didn't know this, by the way, every single one of us has character flaws. Every single one of us has things about our character that we can't see, but guess who sees them? Everybody else. And so, wouldn't it be wise to figure out what those things are? Some leaders wonder why they burn through relationships, feel kind of isolated, or can't get high-capacity leaders or donors to join their cause. Maybe it's because they don't listen very well. Maybe it's because they talk too much or are manipulative. Maybe they're volatile as a leader. Maybe they're unpredictable or have a critical edge that they're not aware of, but everybody else feels it. And friends, let me repeat, we all have flaws that we can't see. So 10 years into leading our church, the board began having meetings without me to discuss my flaws. And it was so serious that at the end of a board meeting one night, our chairman, Dean Hager, said, and I was sitting right across from him, he said, the single issue we are here to talk about tonight is, should Bob Merritt continue being our leader at Eagle Brook Church? I was stunned. And my first thought was, how dare they? How dare they? My second thought was, they could fire me. These 8 people could fire me, and they might. I was standing on a 4-inch beam, and it was my ultimate, I can't get through this on my own moment. I had a vague sense that I had some anger issues, but I thought, the church is growing, we're building buildings, adding staff, meeting budget. What more do they want from me? I'd always thought I'd always thought that talent and results were enough. And what they were saying to me is that if I didn't deal with my anger and harsh language, that I could take my talent and leave. And so they voted in front of me, and they voted to retain me under one condition, that I enter a full year of counseling with a guy named Fred. It was painful. It was humiliating. Fred interviewed everybody who knew me, my staff, my friends. He interviewed my family members, my 2 kids. He interviewed my wife. He interviewed my mom. And the 2 questions essentially were this: what's good about Bob and what's bad about Bob? My mom was the only one who said what's good about me. But everybody else unloaded. And then Fred invited me down to his retreat center about 3 months into this in Lanesboro, Minnesota, to go over the results. I was expecting a little feedback, a little fun time. When he showed me 250 pages, right here, of feedback, where over a 2-day period, he and his assistant read every single thing that people had said about me. Every single word. People were saying things like, Bob doesn't listen. Bob is unapproachable. Bob speaks before he thinks. I heard people say how abrasive and unloving I was. And then Fred read back to me these words from my 15-year-old son. I wonder why my dad is so angry all of the time. I sat there in my chair, and Fred let those words sink into my soul. I was so ashamed. You would think I'd have been aware of that. But I wasn't. That was the beginning of a new life that saved my career and breathed new life into my marriage and family. I would not be standing here today had I not had that intervention at age 45. That correction at age 45 was the breakthrough that saved my career, enabled me to lead 18 more years and become the church that it is. Never would have happened. Let me say it this way. The main force for good or bad in your church, I'm speaking primarily now to the senior leader, the main force for good or bad in your church is you. Not the only force. But the number one factor for the health and growth of your church is how healthy and how growing are you as a senior leader spiritually and relationally. Because any leader can't take people anywhere they haven't been themselves. So are you growing? Are you advancing? Side note, by the way, if you find the courage, leaders, if you find the courage to submit willingly to correction and deal with your stuff, your credibility with your staff and with your church will go through the roof. They will be so thankful that you humbled yourself enough to deal with the things that were a problem. So brace correction, receive it with humility. Finally, be yourself. Be yourself. God created you to be you, not Andy Stanley, Craig Rochelle, Erwin McManus, or Ryan Leake. Let me tell you about these guys. There's only one Andy Stanley, and he's a freak. Don't try to copy him. You know, I've read his communication book, the we, they, you, me, God thing. I get it. It works for him. It doesn't work
for anybody else, even though he says in the book that it does. It doesn't. If you try to copy his style of preaching, you're going to fail. I don't know how he does it, but it's not copyable. So there's only one Andy Stanley. McManus is a content-creating genius, and you and I are not him. And no one carries a stage like Ryan Leake. And if you try, you're going to look foolish and phony. Be yourself. Be yourself. God created you as a masterpiece. Just the way he wanted you to be. 2 Timothy 4:5, fulfill your calling. Maybe your calling is to speak and lead, but maybe it's to support those who teach and lead. Maybe it's to encourage, help, fix, create, or manage something. God has created you to be uniquely you. And he doesn't want you to become somebody else. How freeing to be you. A couple of years ago, I was at the gym lifting weights, and every guy in the weight room, guys, right? Every guy in the weight room is aware of other guys. And we pretend we don't care, but we're kind of checking, how big is that guy and how much is he, whatever. But I was in there lifting weights, and by weights, I mean these 3-pound that I have to use for a shoulder injury. And they're little purple weights. This is actually the weight. And I was lying down on my little mat with my little purple weights, and I was doing this, on my little mat there. When in walked, honest to God, these two absolute beasts. Swear to God. Tattoos, by the way, a lot of tattoos in the room. I don't have any. I tuck my shirt in. Deal with it. Tattoos, skull hats, okay? And they picked up 60-pound weights right behind me, full-length mirror. So I was laying down in front of them. They were behind me, and the mirror was up here. They were watching me on my mat. And they were behind me, and they were doing these 60-pound weights, grunting and groaning. And I'm sure they looked down at me like, how embarrassing. But you know what? I didn't care. And the reason I didn't care is because my worth doesn't come from how much I can lift, but who lifts me. And so I just kept doing my thing. Right in front of these gorilla guys. I mean, just beasts. Because God made me uniquely me. Weaknesses and all. And I'm good with that. Question. Are you good with that? Or are you trying to be somebody you're not? How exhausting. How exhausting to try to be someone you're not. This is, by the way, this is the problem of exaggerated branding. Exaggerated branding is when you create an image that you can't possibly fulfill. And it ends up crushing you because it forces you to make promises you can't keep. I am telling you, greatness is always grown in private, not on Instagram. A lot of stuff we see is just an image. Gang, be yourself. Commit to greatness when nobody's looking. Commit to greatness when nobody's looking, and you will live the life that God has created you to live. Let me close up with this story. 32 years ago, my wife and I bought our first and only home. We planted 50 trees, and we said, we're not moving for 20 years at least. We're going to watch these trees grow, raise our kids, see what God does. But there was a problem on our property, and it was this enormous ball of barbed wire fencing that someone had rolled up over the years and just dumped it on our property, about a half a mile of barbed wire fencing. And it just was a gnarly mess. This old tangled up, gnarly mess. And for 15 years, every time I looked at this pile of mess in our back property, I was just defeated and bothered by it because there's no way I could move it. Every once in a while, I'd kind of tug on it, but it was so big and enmeshed into the ground, it was hopeless. So it sat there for 15 years until one day I made a decision to start breaking little pieces off of this pile because I just couldn't stand it anymore. And I'd walk it up to the garbage. I didn't know if the pile had more metal in it than I had years to live, but I couldn't stand it. I decided each time I was back in our woods, I'd break a piece off, throw it out, because I had to do something. 3 months into this, I thought, this is so stupid because there's not making any difference whatsoever, but I kept at it. After 6 months, I noticed a dent on one side of this pile, and pretty soon whole sections were breaking off, which began to motivate me. I remember the day when I looked at this pile 10 months later, and I knew I was going to win. 2 months after that, this complete pile was gone. I'm telling you, next to getting married and having kids was the happiest day of my life. For 15 years, nothing happened. For 15 years, that pile was my silent enemy until one day I decided to do something. And here's what that pile taught me. Determination beats talent every time. Pushing through, showing up, perseverance will beat talent every single time. We've got one of the best NBA players in the league, Anthony Edwards, going to play your sons. But Edwards has an arrogance problem. I watched it up close and personal at a game. Comes out way after when the team is already out, huddling up. He comes and he prances around like a prima donna, and it shows in his play. That's why I think the Suns are going to kick the Wolves. I hope you don't. But he's got a problem. Because determination beats talent. That goes for getting a degree, saving money, raising a family, growing a church, starting a business. So I want to ask you, what is your big ball of wire? What is so overwhelming that every time you think of it, you say, I can't do that? This is the land of leadership. I would urge you to look into the eyes of Christ, find faith, and then jump. Do that every single day. Then give yourself 20 years and watch God do things you never dreamed were possible. Thanks for letting me come. I am for you. I will be praying for you. I love pastors. I love leaders. Just an honor to be with you today. And so we're going to, Randy, come on up. I'm willing to answer any question at all. You may not have any. You may want to just get on with your day, and that's fine with me. I can go home. But feel free.
Any questions? Any question for Bob?
Anything is fair game.
Hey, Bob, I'm Chris. I'm planning a church in Central Phoenix. You talked about in 20 years, it takes 20 years to do something great and significant. How much did you think backwards? Like, would you talk to someone, a younger leader in this room, and say, like, dream of where you want to be in 20 years and work from that place? Like, what is that relationship?
See, I think planning is overrated.
Yeah.
In fact, I hate goal setting. Whenever they'd say, hey, we're going to do our 5-year, I'm out. I mean, I just hated it. The reason, there's a reason behind it. I just think when you do the right things, if you have your mission, you do the right things day after day, and your disciplines are right. So, I'm a speaker, and I believe it starts and ends there. Not ends, but it starts there. If the preaching or teaching on the weekend is weak, okay, or it's subpar, that's a problem. And so I knew that as a leader, and so what I would, You can plan all you want, but if the preaching doesn't meet the standard, or the music, or your kids' ministries, it's game over. So you can plan all you want, but if your product is suffering, I say that word loosely. So planning is great, but really it's the day-to-day. It's the guys and gals in the weeds, day-to-day, making this thing happen. It doesn't happen by accident. You got to show up. And so, I get it, COVID, and now we're in this new thing where people don't want to work or whatever. I don't have time for that. I just don't have a lot of room for that. And by the way, leaders, you got to build a culture where, hey, we're going to go to work. Call me old school if you want, but that's just the way it is. And you may differ with, I get it. Some jobs, my son stays home a lot. He's a lawyer. He's very good. And now they're starting to have him come down to Minneapolis again to the office. So there are certain jobs where you can get away with that, but it's like in a church, you have relational capital that you have to build and synergies that have to take place. We're going to build a church on our staff where you're going to show up, 4 days out of the week and then execute the weekend. So I can't forget your question already, but planning is overrated. Forget it. I mean, you can, if I had my staff here, they would challenge me on that, but that's okay. Did I answer your question? Okay, good. I can't remember what it is. Just pull on the string and I'll take off.
Yeah. Another one?
Hey, stay up here with me. Sometimes I can't hear. I do a lot of shooting and hunting, so my left ear is like, I'm almost deaf. What? Yeah, exactly. Has nothing to do with my age. Go ahead.
As someone who is 25, what
Yeah.
do you miss about being 25?
I can remember it. That's the problem. I like where I am. Even at 67, I know that I'm on the final quarter here. But I've been so blessed and so, with family, faith, church, the things that really matter in life. I get up every day and I thank God. I'm just so grateful. Gratefulness wasn't something I always had, but I'm just so thankful every single day. I wouldn't want to be 25 again. Honestly. And it's not enough. I mean, you got to be some age. So everybody's something. I mean, you can't help how old you are or how young you are, right? I guess part of my answer is life is really hard. And I would say to a 25-year-old, I could say a lot of things to a 25-year-old. But try not to do stupid stuff. And what I mean by that, try not to do things that are going to really affect you for decades. Try to avoid again, there's forgiveness, there's grace, but stuff sticks with you. And there's a woundedness that can, anyway, on and on and on. Show up. Grow up. It takes a long time, takes a while, and it'll pay off. Yo.
One
that
more?
It? Anybody else?
One more.
A couple more?
Here we go.
Hello.
Hi.
I've had the pleasure of hearing you speak twice, and you're just amazing, so thank you. My question to you is, what kind of advice do you have for a church that's comprised mostly of volunteers?
Well, good luck. You got to start somewhere. We all started with volunteers. So back when we were 300, I had no staff. It was all volunteers. What's my advice? I don't know. Any advice? Your church is all volunteers. I mean, that's what we're working with. I don't know, your question stumped me. Do you have any advice? What's that? Pray often, yeah. You know, where my mind goes to is they will follow a leader. If that leader is humble, honest, and caring. What? Lots of pizza. Yeah. Love your volunteers, but lead them. They want to know the leader believes in what they're doing. They're going to show up. They're going to lead the way. Volunteers need leaders. Yep. I can't hear. Somebody come up here who can hear.
I'll bring you the mic in a minute. Go ahead.
How did your church create a safe space for you to deal with your weaknesses and to grow, as you said?
Where am I? I thought it was over here. How did the church create a safe space for me to what? Grow? Oh, they just stayed out of the way. I mean, how did they create a safe space for me? What's everybody pointing over here for?
The question came from over there.
And what is the question, Randy?
How did your church create a safe space for you to go through that, to grow through that?
You mean when I got confronted with it? They can let me continue to lead and preach while I was going through this in-depth counseling. I mean, week after week. It was hard, just brutal. And they paid a lot of money. It was a $30,000 investment into my life. Talk about a gift. With a leadership coach, and he was a psychologist as well. And then they said, we'll see if you can change. Interestingly, I asked this guy, what's the success rate? My fear was I couldn't change. And he said about 40% will change. I said, well, what's the key factor? He said, number one factor is humility. Will that leader be humble enough to receive the feedback and implement change? And so, I mean, it was a gift. I didn't answer that very well. Sorry about that.
One last one right here.
No, well, my thought was directed towards the gal's question on advice for a volunteer.
Yeah.
So as a volunteer, I just wanted to say, so maybe the verbiage wouldn't be thank you so much, because giving gratitude is like our instinct. Maybe it's for, as a volunteer, I do it for God and not so much for the person saying thank you. So glory to God.
Yep, very good question. Very good answer.
Good job.
Thank you.
Can we
Right,
thank
you
Bob
should get up
again?
here.
I'm sure he'll be hanging around.